Let's talk weird books. Welcome back to my channel. My name's Anna, and I just thought it would be fun to discuss some really weird, bizarre, eerie, off putting books. I wanted to stick with books that I have read in the past 2 years or so that have just struck me in a weird way. If you're on the hunt for a weird book that will scar you in a good or a bad way, then you've come to the right video. These are in no particular order whatsoever, just whatever popped into my mind first. Starting off with Piranesi. I feel like everyone and their mother has heard of this book. It's an incredibly well done book. It has earned its praise. This book was published in 2020, so it's pretty recent. That was almost 5 years ago. No. September of 2020. Okay, so 4 years ago. God, where has the time gone? We follow our main character who is just as lost as we are when we start the book, which I think really adds to that weirdness of the story and of that magical realism, eerie feeling like you're lost in a labyrinth because the main character is literally lost in a labyrinth throughout the majority of the story. I don't want to give anything away, but if you love beautifully crafted writing and a bit of a mystery, as well as just like little sprinkles of really gorgeous, ancient feeling, magical realism vibes, then you would really, really like this book. It's also, once again, just the writing is stunning. I really want to reread it, especially as an hopefully it's a physical book so that I can underline some beautiful lines in there. And yeah, it was a weird read. It's confusing, but it's also incredibly satisfying just because of how beautiful it is and how you're slowly figuring it out along with the main character. So I highly recommend Piranesi. Next on the list, I have one of my most recent reads, My Heart Belongs in an Empty Big Mac Container Buried Beneath the Ocean Floor. Just the title is a weird mouthful in itself. We follow our main character Daniel as he takes us along his life and his struggles dealing with depression and anxiety and how those manifest in his life, which is done in a very bizarre, unique way. Depression manifests in his life in the form of sad looking blue whales that follow him around, crying, being annoying, being loud, being smelly, and not letting him live his life, not letting him get a good job, not letting him maintain good friendships, not letting him maintain a good relationship with anyone because his depression is just so anchored in him. And whenever it gets worse, more and more blue whales appear. I think it's definitely one of the weirdest books out there I have ever experienced. The way that this book is written is incredible, but also extremely bizarre and confusing at times. The humor is incredibly dark, but also hilarious. It doesn't leave anything out. Any intrusive thought that the main character has, any weird ass fantasy that he has, any crazy dream, any unhinged thought, an idea. It doesn't leave anything out, and it's done in a very raw and real way, but therefore it almost feels unsettling and uncomfortable because it's too real, if that makes sense. And I loved it. It's also incredibly bleak and sad, but it does have a bit of a hopeful ending. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I highly recommend. This book comes out November 19th, and I highly recommend to get your hands on it if you're looking for something very real, very raw, very weird. Next on the list, we have The Library at Mount Char. Where to even start with this book? This felt like a fever dream, a nightmare you can't get out of. But once you wake up, a part of you wants to go back just to discover the mystery of it all or to understand what the hell was going on, but at the same time, you're incredibly terrified. That's how this book felt. I could not put it down, but I was also incredibly disturbed and uncomfortable, and just the amount of violence and gore in this book. Definitely read the trigger warnings before you go into it. But if you think, I'm sorry if you can hear my stomach, I need to go eat lunch. If you think you can read it after having read the trigger warnings, then I highly recommend. How do we even describe this book? We follow our main character, Carrie. Her and her 12 adopted siblings were taken in by Father, capital F. Father basically abducted like 12 children when they were all in the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, around that age. And he took them in as apprentices to teach them all of his knowledge. Father owns a library of knowledge on Mount Char, as the title says, which is infinite knowledge that he has been able to collect throughout his life. And he chose these 12 children. Let's go with 12. That could be wrong. I read this book May of this year, I think, and my memory is clearly not the best. But he chose these group of children to follow in his steps, and he divided his knowledge in 12 sections and gave each section one section to each kid. There are rules. The kids are not allowed to study anything outside of their section. It is extremely forbidden and very, very heavily punished. The story follows our main character, Carrie, in her 30s, I believe, as she and her siblings try to discover why Father went missing and how to get back into the library. Once Father went missing, they have not been able to enter the library and have been thrown out into the real world. Take in mind, the majority of them have had very little interaction, if not any, with the outside world, and they're all grown as adults that are very bizarre and quirky and not quite all there. A lot of them, due to trauma and just the uh, the horrific things they have had to learn inside each of their own sections, are a bit off, to say the least. They're just, yeah, they're a bit scary. Carrie's section has been language, so she speaks every language out there that has ever existed. Of course, there is magic here, so Father has spent time to allow them to absorb this amount of knowledge. It's very well written. If you want to dive straight into a nightmare that feels that you will never be able to escape, but at the same time, you need to know what the hell is going on and how this book is going to end. And it's one of the most unique magical realism stories I have ever read. There is no way to predict what is going to happen next. Each page shocked me, each turn of events shocked me, each plot twist blew my mind. And yet, I'm not 100% sure I can say I liked this book, but I still recommend it if you want a very, very bizarre, dark, magical realism. Next, we have Undercover. This is a short novella, and this is by Tamsin Muir, who's the same author of Gideon the Ninth, Harold the Ninth, and Nona the Ninth, the Locked Tomb series, which I'm halfway through and I'm really enjoying. So if you've read those, you know how Tamsin Muir writes. Her writing is very unique and weird on its own. And then we apply the story of Undercover, which is another bizarre as hell story. We follow our main character, who is an undercover cop or an undercover detective, and she gets sent to look over this lady's business. This short story takes place in a futuristic post-apocalyptic environment where zombies exist. They have a different name, ghouls. I'm pretty sure they're called ghouls in the story. And they are humans who have turned into ghouls. You get turned if you get bitten, I believe. Zombies, basically. And they become these creatures that are unsatiable for human flesh. So they're extremely dangerous. You don't want to get bitten by one. And humanity has been trying to combat and survive against them. As in the majority of other zombie stories, these ghouls aren't sentient, or they're not as like, once you get turned into a ghoul, you stop being the person you were, right? You're no longer human. You no longer hold on to what made you you, or to memories, or they don't communicate. They lose all sense of who they were and any knowledge that they held on to, or so we think. Our main character gets sent as an undercover detective to look over this lady's business because something fishy is going on there. And it turns out that she is keeping a ghoul hidden that may or may not be a lot more human than we thought. She has been able to hold on to who she was before she turned into a ghoul, which in itself is very bizarre. And the story just gets darker and twistier. And what we thought we knew about our main character may or may not be very off. It's very short. If you are looking for anything kind of eerie, horror like, detective mystery, but set in a post apocalyptic, dystopian, sci fi environment, then I would highly recommend Undercover by Tamsin Muir. Next, we have Our Wives Under the Sea. This is a magical realism fantasy sci-fi. We basically follow our main character and her wife throughout. We get a little bit of time shifting, so we get to see how the relationship evolved and how the relationship was before the incident. And the incident is that her wife works on a submarine, on a research submarine. She's a scientist, and they have a trip planned to go down into the ocean for about 2 weeks. I think they were only meant to be gone 2 weeks or a few days. I'm not really sure. But something goes terribly wrong and they go missing for months. Once she comes back, things are very off. Things are very eerie. Clearly, the time under the ocean, stuck in a submarine for way too long, has changed her in many different ways. And we follow the wife having to reconcile with the fact that her partner is no longer who she used to be, and just having to take care of someone who you know you love but you also barely recognize. I would definitely classify this as horror, like psychological horror, fantasy horror. Not maybe not fantasy, more like magical realism, but it's also written in a very literary way, and it might not be for everyone, but I definitely enjoyed it. Although it, what's that called when you get like all your hairs stand up? In Spanish we call it piel de gallina. Chicken skin. Why do we call it? I don't know what it's called in English. It just makes all your hairs stand up. But there's a term for that, right? I'm sure you get what I mean. It's very off-putting. A very good conversation about grieving someone who's not gone, but they've changed enough to grieve that part of them. If that makes sense? Next, we have The Starless Sea, and this is the only one on the list that I own a physical copy of. I absolutely loved this book. It's one of my all-time favorites. It will continue to be one of my all-time favorites forever. I need Erin Morgenstern to come out with more books because I also love The Night Circus by her. But The Starless Sea just, oh, it just hit in a different way. And this is the lightest one in the group by far. This isn't scary. This isn't eerie. However, it's still incredibly weird and confusing. And therefore, I don't think it would be for everyone, but I absolutely loved it. If you love magical libraries, a bit of mystery and hidden societies, books within books, stories within stories. Once again, this feels like you're stuck in a dream, but it's not a nightmare. It's just a very beautiful, magical, confusing as hell, long dream that just never ends and it just continues to turn into another story and another story, another story. Then I highly recommend The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I don't even think I can describe the plot of this book, more about the feeling that it gives you, if that makes sense. However, let me read you a little bit of the blurb just to see if you haven't read it, to see if it's something that you might be interested in reading. It says, far beneath the surface of the earth, upon the shores of the starless sea, there is a labyrinth collection of tunnels and rooms filled with stories. The entryways that lead to the sanctuary are often hidden, but those who seek will find. Their doors have been waiting for them. Zachary Ezra Rallins is searching for his door, though he does not know it. When he discovers a mysterious book in the stacks of his campus library, he begins to read and is entranced. Suddenly, a turn of the page brings Zachary to a story from his own childhood. A V, a key, and a sword emblazoned on the book leads Zachary to two people who will change the course of his life. Mirabelle, a fierce, pink-haired painter, and Dorian, a handsome barefoot man with shifting alliances. Amid twisting tunnels filled with books, gilded ballrooms, and wine-dark shores, Zachary falls into an intoxicating world soaked in romance and mystery. But a battle is raging over the fate of this place, and though there are those who would willingly sacrifice everything to protect it, there are just as many intent on its destruction. As Zachary, Maribel, and Dorian venture deeper into the space and its histories and myths, searching for answers and one another, a timeless story unspools, casting a spell of pirates, painters, lovers, liars, and ships that sail upon a starless sea. That says it all, and it says it perfectly. It is truly an intoxicating, elegant, poetic, beautiful, richly creative and imaginative story of stories. This is very confusing, and therefore I think that's why a lot of people don't love it, but I personally am obsessed with this book, so I highly recommend. Next we have The Deep, which is a short fantasy sci-fi. It's very short, it's only around 160 pages or so, and we follow this group of mermaids that are descendant from African women who were tossed overboard to their deaths, and out of that horrible violence and anger and grief were reborn into this group of mermaids, and they became this underwater society. We follow our main character Jetu, not sure how to pronounce it, I'm sorry, and she holds the memories for her people. So as a way to not have to hold on to all that horrible anger and pain and grief that they've gone through, they will have one person, or they'll have one of the mermaids in the society hold on to all the memories of their history, kind of similar to The Giver, if we ever had to read that in middle school. So yeah, she holds on to their past because it's too traumatic to be remembered regularly, so everyone else has the privilege of forgetting it and not having to deal with it. Follow her as she battles with all these questions and contradictions inside of her as she develops a relationship with the surface and the humans that have been left on Earth, as well as trying to reconcile with her own people and understand what it means to be the one to hold on to all of their memories and whether she wants to continue or not. It is very weird. This is a very unique, interesting take on mermaids and sirens, and it's used in a very beautifully dark and painful way, and I really enjoyed this book. I also thought it was very interesting how it was inspired on a song. So the whole book came to be because it was inspired on this one rap song. It was very outside of my comfort zone, or really not what I usually read, and I think maybe that's why it felt so weird to me. I would like to reread this at some point. I listened to it as an audiobook, and I'm wondering if I would have been able to grasp more of the message in the story if I had read it as a physical book. But I highly recommend. It's so short and yet so rich in its story and in its writing. And yeah. And last but not least, we have The Salt Grows Heavy. This is once again a bit of a dark mermaid retelling, I believe. I mean, I read it. I should know. I read this May of last year, so excuse my very fuzzy memory around this short book. Once again, this is a little novella, only about 100 pages. And what I can remember about it was that I felt very uncomfortable and weirded out once again reading it. I'll read the blurb because it's pretty short, and I think I'll be able to explain more the feeling of this book than my very blurry memories of it. The Salt Grows Heavy, a razor-sharp and bewitching fairy tale of discovering the darkness in the world and the darkness within oneself. You may think you know how the fairy tale goes. A mermaid comes to shore and weds the prince. But what the fables forget is that mermaids have teeth, and now her daughters have devoured the kingdom and burned it to ashes. On the run, the mermaid is joined by a mysterious plague doctor with a darkness of their own. Deep in the eerie, snow-crusted forest, the pair stumble upon a village of ageless children who thirst for blood, and the three saints who control them. The mermaid and her doctor must embrace the cruelest part of their true nature if they hope to survive. Okay, this helped me refresh my memory. I remember feeling that I wish this novel had been 3 times as long because there was so much potential and so much beautifully dark world building. It felt very gothic, and I loved the idea of taking a fairy tale, the mermaid who comes to shore and falls in love with the prince, and twisting it into more of, I'm so sorry if you can hear my stomach. I have lunch ready. I just need to finish this video. What was I saying? But yeah, I love the idea of turning a fairy tale into a more dark and twisted tale. And I do wish this had been a bit longer, but I loved the imagery. I love the atmosphere in this book. It made me realize that I want to read more dark mermaid retellings. It's also written in a very lyrical way, so I could also see why this might not be for everyone, but I did. I did highly enjoy it. And if you are interested in a more of a dark fairy tale retelling, then I would give it a go. It's really short, really easy to read. So I think that's that on that. If you have any books that you love and are very weird, uncomfortable, off-putting, eerie, bizarre, they can also be good weird or more like happy light weird like a Star to See, then please let me know because I'd love to find more of these weird books out there. And I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I'll see you in my next video.